Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. So a few days ago, Liam Fox, the International Trade Secretary, whose job it has been to arrange agreements for our post-EU future, has had to admit that talks with Canada have stalled over a trade agreement. And the reason for being so was that they don't want to enter into an agreement with us until no-deal Brexit is taken off the table. But of course, this is something that both of our budding prime ministers intend to forge ahead with. He further said that many other countries are saying the same thing. And this is from one of the three hardcore Brexiteers given key ministries in the wake of the referendum. As a result, a viewer suggested we should probably revisit where we are with these trade arrangements now, especially in the event of a no-deal Brexit. And I think they're right. So, let's go back to the beginning of the Brexit process. Liam Fox said that these trade deals would be the easiest in human history. This was despite people who actually arrange trade deals saying it would be the most difficult due to the diverging nature of those negotiations. And what they meant by that is a normal trade negotiation works on the principle of converging standards and systems. You're moving close together. You are aligning with each other. Brexit means moving in a different direction to your negotiating partner. Now, much later on, as we started to approach the initial deadline of the 29th of March, 2019, Fox was saying that he hoped that all the existing free trade deals would be replaced. So he hoped that. So it was something that was going to be done immediately, and now he simply hopes it was going to be the case. And he said that it would need other countries to be willing to put the work in. So, like a typical Brexiteer, if he couldn't achieve what he said would be quick and easy, that's down to the laziness of others. In fact, 2 months before the Brexit deadline, we had no signatures at all. Then some started to emerge as we got closer, and more have been agreed since the deadline, just highlighting how reckless it would have been to have left at the end of March. So fast forwarding to now, we're in early July 2019, as I say this, just over 3 months after the date at which we assumed we would be leaving. Are all those 40 free trade arrangements that we currently have, are they signed now? No, of course not. Of the free trade arrangements that we have with non-EU countries, we have arranged for about 11, which totals 12% of our exports in goods and services. That does thankfully include Norway and Switzerland, who are significant trading partners with us, and that accounts for the vast majority of that trade. The other nations amount to just over 2%. So, although it sounds good, well, 11, we've got 11 of the arrangements out of 40. I say it sounds good. It's still not the same as having 40 out of 40. But some people might go, I've got 11. That's just over a quarter. But in terms of the value of the trade, it is way less than a quarter. It represents, in fact, half of that. It's an eighth. We do also have, we ought to add in there, mutual recognition agreements with Australia, New Zealand and the United States of America. It'll come as no surprise that the USA one is the most important, accounting for 18% of our exports. So if we add everything up, the free trade agreements that we've got signed as well as the mutual recognition agreements, that totals 32% of our exports in goods and services. And that assumes that we can continue to trade freely with them. You might think, well, we've signed an agreement. Of course we could trade freely with them after Brexit. One difficulty is that some of the goods and services that we export to those countries might depend on, say, an EU country in the chain or another country with which we don't have a signature. For example, we export vehicles to Australia, but we get the parts essentially from EU countries. So not getting deals with some countries means we can't trade as competitively with the countries with whom we have signed because tariffs will make those things more expensive. So the total value of the exports inevitably goes down. So how does having agreements worth 32% of our exports sound to you? Is that a big number? I mean, bear in mind that the number for staying in the EU is 100%. So we've got 68% of our exports having no signature on the dotted line, and now Liam Fox is telling us that those signatures are not going to be forthcoming until we agree a deal with the EU. I mean, we sort of guessed there were sticking points when he didn't have all 40 signed by March like he said he would. Arrangements with the EU will certainly not be forthcoming until we have that deal, of course, and our exports to the EU amount to just over 44% of our total. So the value of our exports to the EU is worth way more than all of the other nations with whom we have signed put together, including the mighty USA. Who'd have thought that trade with your closest neighbours was so important? So why are all these countries hesitant to sign? So put simply, because we'll be in a weaker position and they can improve their own exports by waiting. In order to facilitate imports into the UK in the event of a no-deal Brexit, the UK government has said they intend to reduce all tariffs to zero on 87% of those imports. That means those countries don't have to pay tariffs on their exports to us without any agreement needed. But their exports to us would be subject to tariffs, or our exports to them, I should say, would be subject to tariffs, thus helping their own businesses because our products would not be as competitive in their country. Their products would be way more competitive in ours. I mean, we are literally offering them free trade deals to these countries in a way that isn't reciprocated. So what if the UK decided not to drop those tariffs on all those imports? Well, it might help our negotiating position, but it would mean that our exporters would have to pay too much for imported raw materials and parts, and combined with the export tariffs as well, would be completely priced out of the market. You know, it was an act of desperation saying we were going to reduce our import tariffs to zero. And that's assuming a manufacturing sector even exists, which the likes of Jeremy Hunt has said would have to collapse, and it would all be worth it. Oh, if your business goes under, it's totally worth it for some reason. But if we do arrange a deal with the EU, then we're in a stronger position, and those countries feel that a deal on the current terms is probably the best they would get in the short term. Now, finally, when I talk about the value of exports that we are losing, I'm basing that on figures from 2017, 2018, depending on which ones we have. But since then, the EU has, of course, agreed or ratified free trade arrangements with Japan, Singapore, Vietnam, and now the South American bloc, Mercosur. So there's also an element of an increase in our trade capacity were we remaining in the EU that will be lost to us by leaving. So to summarise, I would say we were going to have better trade deals than we currently have with the EU. It's being in the EU that was the problem with getting these super awesome trade deals. But the reality is now that we don't even have the same level of interim arrangements ready for when we leave, much less better. And the number of prominent Brexiteers who are still claiming that within a few years after leaving, we will get those better ones, and they're a bit thin on the ground now. We have 32% of our trade secured with agreements that have been signed, though that is based on the assumption that we can still supply those exports without agreements with other nations who are part of the supply chain, which of course we can't. And that's without even mentioning the dreadful trade deal that President Trump wants us to sign, which will directly lead to the deaths of many UK citizens. But not to worry, really, I suppose. Trump says he won't sign an agreement with us if we get a deal with the EU. He says it's either no deal or he won't deal with us. But Pelosi, who is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, has said that they won't sign an agreement if we don't get a deal with the EU because of the Ireland border issue. So that sorts that out as well. So there we are. Let me know what you're thinking in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.